Hello ladies, gentlemen, and persons in between. My name is Tim Snowborn, and today I'm just going to rant about the Republicans and why they keep winning elections despite appealing to a relatively narrow and supposedly shrinking demographic of angry, disenfranchised white voters, and a rather unpopular platform designed primarily to serve the very wealthy. Welcome to another episode of Serious Issues. So I've talked before about how the Democrats just can't seem to pull their heads out of their asses and get their shit together and win more elections like they should. But in their defense, there are at least a couple of things they have working against them. The first is something I've mentioned before. It's the fact that the bad guys are almost always more aggressive than the good guys. It's part of the reason they're the bad guys, because they're more aggressive. They don't play fair, they don't wait their turn, they push their way to the front of the line and bully people into submission. They gerrymander the voting districts in their favor, they give people the wrong voting location, they give people the wrong hours, they limit the number of voting locations in a given area, they pass voter ID laws. I mean, don't get me wrong, the voter ID thing kinda makes sense. It kinda makes sense to ask people to prove who they are before they vote. But voter fraud hardly ever actually happens. I know that Republicans and conservative pundits like to pretend that it happens all the time, but it actually doesn't. The number of verified voter fraud cases in the last 2 decades is less than 100, I think. What makes conservatives think that voter fraud only benefits the liberals anyway? Do they think that conservatives are just above that kind of thing? That conservatives would never commit voter fraud? How self-righteous do you have to be to not even consider that voter fraud might benefit your team as well? Don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to say that voter fraud is good, it isn't. But there's no reason that voter fraud should only benefit the Democrats. You don't see liberals worrying about voter fraud benefiting the Republicans, even though we know it's just as likely, because we also know that it doesn't actually happen very often. Now let me say early on that I am not implying that the Democrats are completely innocent and only ever do good things. But the Democrats don't work nearly as hard to game the system and stack the deck in their favor. And the other problem is that there's a double standard regarding the acceptable behavior from Democrats versus Republicans. This manifests in a couple of ways. Democrats just aren't allowed to do the things that Republicans do. If the Democrats told people the wrong polling places and limited voting hours and limited voting locations and all that other stuff I mentioned, if the Democrats did any of that, they wouldn't exist as a party anymore because people would lose their minds. Liberals would be almost as angry as the Republicans, and they would hold them accountable, the way conservatives don't hold Republicans accountable. And this goes for campaign finance, too. Liberals bitch and bitch about the Democrats taking money from corporate interests, but if they didn't, they'd have a very hard time competing with the Republicans, who are only too happy to take money from corporate interests. And it's like they can take the high road and refuse money from corporate interests and risk not raising enough money to beat the Republicans, or they can take money from corporate interests and have liberals bitch about how they're just as bought and paid for as the Republicans are. They're damned if they do and damned if they don't. And the other way the double standard works against the Democrats is liberals are not allowed to do basically anything that Trump has done. It almost goes without saying that if Trump was a Democrat, he never would have made it past the primaries. Again, liberals would have been almost as upset as conservatives, and they never would have let him win the nomination. Because liberals have standards. And I know I started this channel by saying that we've got to try and be nice to conservatives and understand where they're coming from and everything and not be such assholes and talk all this shit about them. But you know what? I feel really comfortable saying that conservatives have no standards anymore, because Trump. Conservatives have officially surrendered any and all moral authority they once claimed to have. I never want to hear another lecture about values and morality from the party that elected Donald Trump as our president. Trump is proof that conservatives only care about winning and will tolerate any behavior as long as their guy can win. They just want to push their agenda, and they literally don't care what it costs them or what it does to the country. It is breathtaking what they will tolerate from this guy. Trump's entire campaign was a series of what used to be called career-ending gaffes. Mitt Romney must be so pissed. All he said was that 47% of Americans are a bunch of useless takers. That was practically a compliment compared to the shit Trump has said out loud to cameras he knew were on. Recently, we found out that Trump paid off a porn star to keep quiet about an affair they had after his wife gave birth to his youngest son. Since he has become president, Trump has done numerous things that would have resulted in impeachment proceedings beginning the next day for any Democrat. It's galling how Republicans went after Obama mostly for stuff they made up, and then Trump comes along and does dozens and dozens of things that actually should have resulted in investigation and impeachment, and they just sweep it under the rug and look the other way and make excuses. A Democrat could be pure as the driven snow, and the Republicans would make up reasons to investigate them. Trump could fuck a baby to death on national television, and a third of the country would defend him to the last, and Sean Hannity would get on TV and talk about how that makes him a better president than Obama ever was. The Republicans have this cutthroat, Machiavellian, Kaiser Soze approach to their campaigns. The winner is the guy who is willing to stoop lower and do what the other guy won't. So the Republicans go low, and the Democrats have a choice of either going low with them or staying on the high ground and losing. And Trump isn't the only one. Roy Moore didn't lose in Alabama because the white people there decided that his habit of chasing teenage poon was a bridge too far. He lost because black women decided that he would be a nightmare for their community and said hell no. It just seems like Republicans can get away with so much horrible behavior, whereas liberals tend to abandon any candidate who does something that they don't like, even if they're mostly good people. Liberals will abandon a candidate who made one vote that they disagree with. Now, I'm not saying that no liberal has ever stayed in office despite doing something terrible, or that no Republican has ever resigned from office after doing something terrible. There has been some crossover, but as a general rule, liberals tend to get rid of the worst among them, and conservatives tend to elect them. And this lack of moral and ethical standards and the willingness to tolerate any behavior is what helps conservatives control this country. So tell me what you think, America. Am I just another liberal asshole who thinks that the Republicans are pure evil and the Democrats are pure as the driven snow? Do you agree that there's a double standard between conservatives tolerating any bad behavior from their candidates and liberals not tolerating even the slightest imperfection? Thank you very much for joining me for this conversation. If this is your first time on my channel, welcome. It's great to have you here. I would love to have you subscribe and join me for future conversations, and check out my older videos for more. If you're a current subscriber, thank you very much for coming back. I really appreciate your continued support. I'm still taking suggestions for a catchphrase to end these episodes with, but until I find one, eat Dick's, everyone. Dick's Restaurant. It's a burger chain here in the Pacific Northwest. The food is adequate, I guess, if you're drunk, and they're open after the bars close, so enjoy.